welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And boy, oh boy, do I have a great story behind this book. It is written by McCracken Poston Jr., and I am so thrilled to welcome him here today to talk about Zenith Man. Hi.
Hi, Patsy.
Okay, well, McCracken, I am so happy to have you here. And because this book, Zenith Man, Death, Love, and Redemption in a Georgia Courtroom, is so great. And I want to hear the entire story behind it. But let's start a little bit first about you and your name.
Oh, thank you. My full name is McCracken King Poston Jr., and that's something that I didn't think much of until I realized that my father's brothers were named Cal and Doug and John. And so I asked my grandmother when I got old enough to be able to form such thoughts, what was she thinking when she named my father that? I'm the last of his 6 children, the first son. So I get the name. And she told me that if my father were born in modern times, he would be called a preemie or a premature baby. He was so small, they put him in a wooden box on a lit wood stove. And to keep him warm. And the doctor came by later after delivery and took a look at him and told my grandmother that in all likelihood he would not survive the night. So my grandmother named him McCracken for her maiden name, King for her mother-in-law's maiden name, and Poston. And I became McCracken King Poston Jr.
Well, I think it's a great name, and I'm so happy to have you here today because I love this book. And I see that you have the book behind you, which is great because I also wanted to make sure that I had it right here so everybody could see it. And the subtitle is Death, Love, and Redemption in a Georgia Courtroom. And it is a great book. And let's start a little bit. Let's talk first a little bit about you and your background.
Well, thank you. I'm from here. I was born in Catoosa County, Georgia. Now, Catoosa County and Ringgold, Georgia is in northwest Georgia, situated immediately below Chattanooga, Tennessee. So if you've ever driven to Chattanooga from the south, uh, there's a strong likelihood you've been through Ringgold, Georgia. But what we're mainly known for is the place where Dolly Parton and her husband Carl Dean slipped away against her manager's wishes and got married. Ringgold was known as the quick marriage capital of the South in those days. We had a one-stop shopping marriage license, blood test, and ceremony, and it became kind of famous. We're situated in the corner of Tennessee and Alabama. North Carolina is fairly close. People would slip away here and get married, as Dolly and Carl did. 3 weeks later, after Dolly Parton and Carl Dean got married, Alvin and Virginia Ridley went to get their marriage license. Alvin is the subject of my book, and he and Virginia are on the cover. That's an amusement park photo booth pane from a 4-photo strip. And by the time George Jones and Tammy Wynette got married in Ringgold, Georgia in 1969, Virginia Ridley was missing.
And there starts our story. So let's talk about the title because that's an intriguing title and everybody's wondering what does it mean because it really a lot of people don't remember or never even heard of Zenith TVs or radios. My grandmother had a Zenith radio that she had in the windowsill when she'd sit on the porch and she would be peeling potatoes or whatever, she would have the window open so she could listen to her Zenith radio. So tell us about the TV business that Alvin was in.
Well, my grandmother also had a Zenith radio. I inherited it, a 1929 version. and it's a beautiful wood cabinet. And TVs in these days, in the 1950s, 1960s, they were very often in beautiful furniture cabinets that were huge and very heavy. So we had TV repairmen. Well, Alvin Ridley was both a salesman and repairman, and Zenith was his brand. And he had a store in downtown Ringgold, Georgia, but he worked into Chattanooga and into northeast Alabama, and was well known as a very crackerjack TV repairman of the picture tube era. What happened was a mystery when Alvin shuttered his business in 1984. He posted missives on the inside of the glass blaming so many public officials and others for the ending of his business. In reality, it was probably the advent of solid state circuitry that did him in. Alvin was trained in the old school of picture tube repair. As he today laments, people just throw their TVs away now. With solid state circuitry and circuit boards came much cheaper televisions, and there aren't places to repair them. It's just not cost efficient. People just say throw them away, upgrade, get you a bigger screen.
Well, I always like that Zenith logo because my name is Patsy with a Z, so
That's right.
I was always coming up with ideas of how to use Z's. So
Well, it's got a kind of a double meaning too. Zenith means the apogee or the peak. And so if you are a person at your zenith, then you are at your best. It's kind of an ironic title because Alvin Ridley was at his lowest, and at his lowest in society, at his lowest in the ability to operate both his business, and ultimately in October of 1997 he became suspect when there was a dead woman found in his house. He called first a hospital in Chattanooga because he didn't trust the local officials, but then reluctantly he called 911 and, in a very flat vocal effect, told them that he thought his wife was not breathing. And it shocked the community because so many years had gone by that people forgot that he had a wife. Her family didn't forget. Her family had been accusing him for many, many years of keeping her captive in the basement. And that rumor was revived. And unfortunately, Alvin did not have the ties to the community to go to bat for him. And so the rumor mills went immediately off the board. He became even more suspicious acting because of the way people were treating him. And so it became just this endless cycle. Now, 3 days after her death, I began to see Alvin Ridley on the street. And that was a surprise because he usually wasn't out. And so for 2 days in a row, I encountered him. The third day, I realized this is not by accident. He is trying to engage me in conversation. So I stopped and I said, Mr. Ridley, I'm sorry to hear of your loss. And that just uncorked the bottle. He became very agitated, almost yelling how the government had bothered his father to death, had bothered and worried his mother to death, and now they bothered and worried his wife to death. And they're asking him questions about his wife. I didn't realize that her funeral was that afternoon. And I just told him, well, don't talk to the authorities. Just that's my nature as a criminal defense lawyer, is just maintain your right to remain silent and come talk to me sometime about it. Well, he immediately did the opposite of everything I ever told him. He met with the officers that day again. And so it was a very beginning of a very frustrating relationship.
And at which point you took over his defense?
Well, Alvin was not immediately charged. And again, the rumor mills were just at full tilt. They were completely taking all types of liberties about what was going on in his world, in his life. There were rumors that he had bought a gun in Dalton, a town just south of us. There were rumors that he had been threatening a deputy. And I had to go, it just went crazy. But for 8 months, nothing happened. So our interaction became less and less. I told him, I said, maybe they're figuring out that your wife had epilepsy because you told them that that probably is why she died, because he said that he woke up and she was face down on the bed and had had a seizure earlier that early morning. And so I said, let's just not worry about it. But if I hear that you ever get charged, I'll come looking for you. And so happened to be limping into a tire store after you remember when the Firestone crisis happened on Ford Explorers, where all of them came with that Bridgestone Firestone tire that the tread was separating and there were blowouts. I had one of those on a brand new Ford Explorer, and I was limping into a tire dealer in Ringgold, and he was so excited. He said, "They just arrested Alvin Ridley here. There's his truck being towed away." And I thought, oh gosh, I never told family who I was talking to until it became public. I had a wife of just a matter of weeks, and I was telling her I needed to go, and I went and met Alvin in the Catoosa County Jail, and then resumed in earnest to represent him.
I love how you write about this in the book. You make, you know, we're going to talk about the reviews you've gotten, but it is so it is so wonderful how you write. As I'm reading it, I, I started reading it and I was thinking he's a new writer. They're telling me he's not a novelist, but it's written so well, and it is a story that you just brought to life. And you have to tell us about how you got him to come to your office, because he was reluctant to even come to your office.
Alvin was so paranoid of everyone, and I had been in public office, and I had even kind of chastised him about something, a matter I had helped a constituent with, that Alvin was the problem. And I kind of had chastised him. So I was shocked that he would trust me enough to come to me, but he didn't trust me enough to actually follow up and get an appointment and come to my office. Instead, he got my home number from my father and would call me at all hours of the night screaming at me. And I would say, well, officially I'm not your lawyer yet, but let's have an understanding here, because obviously you and your wife were very private people. And he agreed with that notion. And I said, well, my new wife is also very private. So if you don't have to make an appointment. If you'll just come by my office anytime you see my car there, I'll stop what I'm doing and see you. That way he could control. He always feared that if he had made an appointment, then authorities and tormentors and Virginia's family would have some type of knowledge of where he was going to be. So that seemed to work. It was my first compromise of many that I made for him.
So giving him permission to just walk in was really a key, and it shows how sensitive you were at that point in your life too, that you understood something. A lot of, well, I don't with a lot of people, but I thought that was so sweet of you, and such a southern gentleman kind of way to ease him into, just
Patsy, I took 2 nanny goats as a fee one time for an aggravated assault case. So there are adjustments you make in small town law.
and you certainly had to make quite a few with Alvin as you got to know him. There were difficulties, um, in many things, in getting into his house, and I don't know how much we want to reveal here, but let's go to the part where he's charged, and now you are his lawyer, and you have to go tell us about that process, and then we'll talk about when. Is this the courthouse? I'm not sure if I got the right courthouse. Is that
That's our courthouse. That is our 1939 courthouse. It was a Depression era Works Progress Administration project, a Depression era project. The courthouse that they tore down for this one was saved by General Sherman. This was the first part of Georgia in his march through Georgia, and his troops set fire to it. Well, he realized that there was a Masonic temple in the top floor. So he ordered his troops to extinguish the fire that they had just started. Many of us wish that they had saved the old pre-Civil War courthouse, because what a historical gem that would have been if Sherman wouldn't even burn it. Why do we tear it down? But this courthouse was certainly a bigger one, and for a growing county, it became very small very soon as the county continued to grow. But what's interesting about, and I'm looking at those, the columns that are kind of a facade, kind of false images of columns. They're just uh, an architectural thing.
embellishment kind of thing?
Yes, those windows on the second floor on both sides of those are the grand courtroom. That window closest to us of those two, that's the window that Alvin and I looked out of many times during breaks of the trial. I wanted to corner him in that corner because Alvin was bad about just bolting from the courtroom and following someone else's legal advice to go try something. For every ounce of suspicion that Alvin had about local government, he had a counterweight of hope from the federal government. I can't explain it, but that's just the way he felt. So he always felt the federal government was going to save him. That came up several times. One day he missed court. Uh, I was threatened that if I did not get him back by the afternoon session, he would stay in jail until the trial. This was our motions hearing. Alvin had escaped to the VA hospital in Chattanooga, and I found him there since I was one of the people that introduced him to VA medicine, realizing, hey, you're a veteran, I can, get you medical care. Just let's sign you up. So I was one of his authorized people that they would talk to about his case, his medical case. And I called ahead, and they said, yes, he's here. He said he got bit by a giant spider. So I was so used to Alvin's outrageous excuses. He used to argue with me that the Constitution said that if he did not feel well, he did not have to go to court. So I had to start carrying around the U.S. Constitution, a little paperback uh, copy of it, and challenging him on it every time he raised that issue, because there is no such provision in the Constitution. So it just became this wild game of cat and mouse. But Alvin believed and trusted in the federal government. One of the things that inspired me to stick with him, my last race in politics was a race for the United States Congress. I had 4 great terms in the Georgia state legislature, and I ran for the U.S. Congress, and I was destroyed. The winds of change had shifted. The red tide of Georgia Republican Party washed all the way up into my little corner of the state, and I was an old Southern Democrat, and I got wiped out by an incumbent congressman who had switched parties. So he read the tea leaves and switched. I wrote in the book because everybody started switching then. I guess I was the bellwether. And so I wrote in the book that what was interesting is down at the state capitol, so many people were immediately switching parties that everybody was going to get their change, but the faces were going to stay the same. And so that was, of course, a low mark in my life and my self-esteem. And so I'm in my early days of representing Alvin. My secretary comes in, and Alvin was in the room. My secretary comes in and says, "The congressman is on the phone, wants to talk to you." Well, I was very surprised. I couldn't realize why he would be calling me.
I
I did
love this
notice.
story. I have to stop you for a minute. When I read this story, when I read this part of the book, I was laughing so hard. I thought it's just a beautiful story. So there
Well,
you are in
the
your
Lord works in mysterious ways, and I was needing motivation. Alvin was so difficult in my office. All he wanted to talk about was the 1984 seizure of his van because he filed so many lawsuits. It was bound to happen. Somebody counterclaimed, and they levied on his van and took his van. Well, Alvin figured out that he's smart. He figured out that they didn't do it right, and he got the van back 3 weeks later. But Alvin refuses to accept it back. He says that would trigger a new statute of limitations that he wants to keep open. So that van is still sitting where it was returned this year, 40 years. So that's all he wanted to talk about was they took my van. And I said, "Alvin, this is a murder case. We've got to talk about your wife." And he goes, "No, we don't, because I didn't kill her. But they did take my van." That was his logic. I was going crazy. And so I got to the point that in the office one day, he started in on the van, and our voices would just escalate. At some point, I was just exasperated. I was exasperated a lot during this case. And I just closed my eyes and I said, "Oh, Lord, like here we go again." Alvin fell silent. And I looked, and he looked like a child going into a prayer. He had his hands clasped together and his eyes shut tight and his face down. He thought I was praying. And so I ran with it. And I just said, "Oh, Lord, please help Alvin understand that we've got to talk about Virginia. We will talk about the van later, but we got to talk about Virginia." And I would, go through quite a long prayer giving of legal advice. And at the end, Alvin would just respectfully nod and say, "I'll think about it." So here's the congressman calling. And I see Alvin kind of straightening up like he was impressed or something. And I thought, well, at least I'll impress Alvin by calling the congressman back. So I called the number back and got through the operator. And there's the familiar voice of my former opponent, who I'd known for 10 years because he had been in the Georgia legislature as well. And so I'm looking at Alvin. Thank God I wasn't on speakerphone, because I'm looking at Alvin while I'm talking to him, and he says, he's ordering me basically, "Keep Alvin Ridley away from my congressional offices. He's scaring the ladies there." So I'm looking at Alvin, listening to this advice, or actually mandate, And it was a warning. It was clear that, this was the notice that any violation after the notice would be a legal trespass and something that Alvin could get arrested for. So I told Alvin, I just said, let's go outside. And I said, Alvin, that damn congressman. Alvin looked oddly at me like, why would I damn a congressman? I said, he hates me, don't you? And he looked very confused because I said, the election. And Alvin looked very confused because he knew I had been routed. I'd seen him the night of my election before Virginia died, and he knew that I had been beat. And I said, Alvin, if you will just help me help you and stay away from the congressional offices, because if you go there, the congressman's going to have me and you arrested. And Alvin, I cannot afford to be arrested right now. I said, if you will just do this, at the end of all this, I'll take you and show you where he lives. That was enough.
It is so funny. It is so funny. I mean, it is, well, you crack me up. I can tell you.
That was true. But it's true. Everything in the book is true.
Well, and you use the congressman's name.
Well, yeah, I'd used his name. He later became our governor for 2 terms. I helped him along so much in his political journey. He served for 2 terms as our governor, Governor Nathan Deal. Well, but he does find redemption in the acknowledgments.
That's why
everybody gets redeemed in this book.
I really, as I said, I'm thinking, well, maybe this is a novelization or something or that. And I actually checked because I don't know governors of Georgia, and I said, oh my gosh, he's a lawyer, he can get away with it. Write this.
Well, so it's true too. The truth is, and everything in the book is true. The congressman calling me. That's what congressman ordering me to keep Alvin Ridley and specifically away from his congressional office. And what if I just ordered Alvin, this is embarrassing, Alvin, stay away from that congressman's office, Alvin would have gone to spite me. But I had to bring him in. I did not understand at the time what was making Alvin tick. I was trying everything. It's no secret that I struggled to tell this story for 25 years. I gave it to anybody who wanted to tell it. Forensic Files, season 5, episode 9, you Forensic Files nuts out there. American Justice with Bill Curtis. Mm-hmm. People Magazine did a feature on this story. The Washington Post front page. NPR's Snap Judgment. They all covered this story, but all before the last piece of the puzzle was found. And I'm going to go ahead and say it because it's in the description of the book on Amazon and other retailers. 3 years ago, a juror from our case contacted me through a third party and suggested to me that they thought she was a nurse in Alaska now. She left, she was a newspaper reporter and editor. The fact that she got on the jury scared the hell out of me because she had been writing about the case. I thought that was going to be an easy disqualification for her, but apparently it wasn't. So she ended up on the jury. But she later became a nurse in Alaska. Her name is Kimberly Clark Barnes, and she reached out and said, I think maybe Alvin may have autism. And the minute that word came into my head, because nobody was talking about adult autism in the late 90s. But since then, we almost all know someone who is on the spectrum. We almost all know a neurodivergent person now, a loved one, a friend's child. It is a spectrum, and so we all plot out cosmically on a spectrum anyway. But on the autism spectrum, they're very different plots, points that you could be plotted out on. Well, it suddenly made so much sense to me. I took Alvin to a specialist in Atlanta with his permission and with his permission to discuss it. It has been the best thing ever because finally, and unlike all of those other tellings of the story, I had an explanation for Alvin. I had an explanation for his and my conflict. Now, Patsy, I get quite personal in this story about my own life. And that was because of the realization that I was a horrible micromanaging control freak. And, I kind of got to the roots of that. I'm the son of a very loving, but very pitifully alcoholic father. He was never mean. He was never abusive to anybody in our family, but he was drunk pretty much every day after work. And I loved him so and always wanted him not to be drinking. And when you're a kid, and especially if they're not being abusive, you can't find a reason to hate them. They're not giving you that. They're giving you all kinds of reasons to look inside yourself of, well, why would he want to drink when it's my time with him? And so, what you do as a kid is you become a micromanaging person that tries to keep the waters calm all the time. That's who I was. I despised conflict. I didn't want there to be anything that roiled the waters, and I carried that into my life. It certainly cost me in relationships because I couldn't help it. But at this time, I was practicing those same things that I would do. So you match a micromanaging control freak with someone who's on the autistic spectrum, that is a formula for conflict. And that's what Alvin and I were doing. And only when I would find a way to compromise my own demands for Alvin would I actually get his cooperation. I started realizing that he was also very transactional. At some point in the case, I began paying him. I'm paying my own client to cooperate. And ultimately, he wouldn't let me in his house for over a year. And it was only because of my parents making a plate at Thanksgiving and telling me, son, we want you to take this to Mr. Ridley. He doesn't have anyone. That's the last place I wanted to go on Thanksgiving. But I did dutifully. And it was that gesture that caused Alvin to open up his home to me. And I don't want to give away the whole book, but inside his home, I found the key evidence that was so critical in his case, except he didn't want me to have it.
So let's go back to this. Let's go back to the legal case. Let's go back to the courthouse, because this is, I love how you write about this. And I'm glad that you mentioned the juror, because take us, so you had a trial date. You had to get Alvin ready for that. That was a process. And then you had jury selection. So tell us about that, the start.
Well, of course, knowing Alvin would show up was always dicey. So I made it understood that I was coming to get him. And now that I had access to his home, he did let me in several other times. So once we'd gotten over that barrier, and we would have these knockdown, drag out fights over just just his showing up. I said, look, I've gotten the evidence now, if you'll let me use it. I've gotten the evidence now that I think can save you. But we've got to show up, or they will try you in absentia, and I'll be sitting there looking like a fool, and they'll convict you, and they'll eventually find you, and they'll lock you away for the rest of your life. And, he would mumble around, and I would throw the Constitution at him to show him that there's no such provision that says he gets a free pass if he's sick. He started wearing this outrageous neck brace, and it was a soft neck brace, the kind that people faking car accident injuries are. People laugh and say how they wear those. So I'll give you an example. There's Alvin wearing his soft neck brace in court. And that is his very signature stare that he would give people, which is very hard to get around that. So I finally convince him. He's covered up to the chin in his bed. He won't come to the door. I find the door is open, so it's almost like this is pre-planned. That I come in. And by the way, while I was trying to get into his house over that year, I offered to reinstall a phone in his house, because then he could call me on my Atlanta-based cell phone, because otherwise from a phone booth, it would be calling long distance. So I just thought, I'll make this easy. I'll just get a phone put back in his house, and then he's calling me and I'm paying the bill anyway, so he can call long distance. And so he knew, Alvin always figured out my angle. And he knew that this was part of my ploy to get in his house in the summer of 1998. So I knew the phone installer, and he was ready, and I had my camera, and we show up to install the phone. And Alvin decides, okay, I'm just going to have the phone put on the porch, denying us both access to the interior of this house. So in any event, by this time I was getting to go in his house, and Alvin's not coming to the door. It's first day of trial. I go in, he's completely covered up to his chin in bed, and he's groaning, and his eyes are closed. And he starts the BS about the Constitution, saying he didn't have to go to court if he wasn't feeling well. And I was ready for him. I had the little paperback Constitution. I threw it down on the bed, and I said, you find the provision and I will file the motion. Well, hands came out, and he fumbled around and said, well, I'll talk about it later. He pulls the covers down. He's completely dressed. Shoes, pants, shirt, sports coat, and but no neck brace. And I offered him a tie, and it didn't match, but I offered it. And so we get to court. We're about to start picking jurors. They're about to be released into the courtroom, the panels that we're going to pick from. And Alvin declares, I'm leaving. And I said, no, you can't leave. I told you what would happen if you left. You'll be arrested. We'll have a trial anyway, but you'll be in shackles. Or maybe that's not really what would happen, but I probably trying to scare him. Alvin said, well, you forgot my neck brace, like it was my responsibility. So the one that he wore was so stinky and old that we called it the stench radiator. And I thought, what an opportunity. I sent my secretary to the medical supply just down the street, even closer than Alvin's house. I said, get him a new one. And so as these jurors are filing in, his lawyer is putting on a fake accident neck brace on his neck.
Oh,
I'm only then realizing what this probably looks like.
This is too funny. You're too funny. It's delightful.
So, with the evidence that he would not let me have, every day he brought in scores of cockroaches. This is verified on season 5, episode 9 of Forensic Files, when juror Kimberly Clark Barnes is telling them roaches kept coming out of those suitcases and that I was stomping them and trying to, cover them up. Well, we started the trial in this windowless box of a courtroom annex that was built in 1982. The last place Virginia Ridley was ever seen in public was in that courthouse that you're showing the picture of, which is the Grand Old Courthouse. And in those second floor windows closest to the middle is the Grand Courtroom. And Alvin was fighting an eviction from public housing. Now, what kind of eviction do you think goes to a jury trial? Well, an Alvin Ridley kind of case goes to a jury trial, him representing himself. What kind of eviction would have the parents of Virginia Ridley present at it? Well, it was obvious that Virginia's parents helped force this eviction. They had been since 1968, and I'll share this with your audience. Since 1968, they had been publicly seeking her. Let's see if I can get this straight. That says, "Parents seek married daughter." And that's a newspaper article from the Catoosa County News, but they were also running it in the Chattanooga Times.
Huh.
And so from 1968 to 1969, in this very article, they say they haven't seen her in 15 months. And that was 1969. So this is an eviction trial in 1970 in that courtroom that Alvin is defending himself. And suddenly the Superior Court judge stops the trial and says, "Mr. Ridley, let's get to the bottom of this. Have someone go get your wife, not you go get it." He sent Alvin's father to go get Virginia. And Virginia and Virginia's parents and Alvin's father got to go back into chambers with the judge. Alvin was not allowed to go. But according to what his father and Virginia told him, Virginia told her parents in front of the judge, "I don't want to be with you. You helped us get evicted. You forced an eviction from our apartment." The conflict really began when her parents raided the apartment looking for beer. Now, Patsy, this was a dry county when I was growing up. And Catoosa County, Georgia, probably stayed dry longer than most because we had the cheat of going across the Tennessee state line to Chattanooga and getting all our spirits. So we could remain pious in our dryness because we had it right next door. And so Virginia's parents were extremely religious, and they raided the young couple's public housing apartment thinking that military guy may have beer in our sweet, innocent daughter's apartment. Well, I understand the Hickeys being very protective of Virginia. She had had severe epilepsy since age 9. She also occasionally had reactions to the epilepsy medicine. So she really was suffering in that way. But now they had pissed her off. And she let the court know and let them know. And from that day, September 15, 1970, her parents left her alone. 27 years later, she's dead. whose remaining are her siblings, who had been listening to family lore for decades that their sister had been taken, held captive, probably in a basement, and now murdered. And so they were simply just carrying the family story forward. I don't, I have a lot of empathy for the Hickey family. I have 5 sisters. I would have raised hell if one of them had gone missing. I would have probably done everything the Hickey family was doing over the years. Um, for some reason, until that day, Virginia never told them her true feelings about the issue. Now, I find because Alvin is obsessed with me learning all this ancient civil litigation, I actually pulled the file from that eviction and I found a jury list. Now, this had been 29 years, 28 years ago, but I knew one of the jurors. And so I went and found her and I said, I doubt if you remember this, but you were a juror on an eviction case. She goes, "Oh, I remember this. That was the strangest thing I'd ever sat through." And she told about how the judge just ended the trial and ordered this woman to be brought forward. So it was just Alvin's insistence that I look at this old litigation actually paid off. But
So when you went now to court to select his jury for this trial, tell us about the jury selection.
well, it was an ordeal because Alvin had already fled. I had to try 2 murder cases back to back. I was appointed on one with another lawyer, but it's the same jury pool. So I'm telling Alvin, first you have to come to court today to answer up because they do a calendar call. And if you don't answer up, they'll put a bench warrant out on you. But secondly, we're going to start trying this other case, but it's the same jury pool. So we're asking the same questions of the same people that are going to constitute your jury. So you have to be there. You have to be watching them. You have to be writing down when you remember, did I do a TV deal with that person? Did I grow up with that person? With Alvin, everything was very simple. He liked them if they liked him. And rarely in this group of people, especially with the charges he had, was there going to be anybody smiling at him. There was one character who kept winking at me. He so bad wanted to be on the
No,
jury.
you I I hate
That
to
was
just
Cheese Goins, whom I had represented many times. And he just liked stirring things up. That's just what, but I knew him from Graysville, my small town 5 miles north of Ringgold. I grew up with his children. And if there was going to be something stirred up, Cheese Goins was going to be the guy with stirring it. And he just decided he wanted to be on that jury so bad that he was pretending he didn't know me. Well, the judge and the DA, they knew I had actually represented Cheese Goins before. So he kept winking at me and then looking away and didn't raise his hand when the DA asked the jurors how many know Poston here. And he, very clearly did not raise his hand. Well, that's when it became an ethical obligation on my part to go to the bench and say, by the way, we all see Cheese Goins out here. He didn't raise his hand, but as the court knows, I represented him fairly recently on charges. And so he was very upset when the DA struck him because there was no way the DA was going to let Cheese on the case. And quite frankly, I didn't want him on it either because it would probably be a mistrial and I didn't want to try the case again.
so did did
The
Alvin
DA
give you
struck him and Alvin was disappointed. That was Alvin's contemporary, I guess. If you want a jury of your peers, that was his one peer. Um, but Alvin, I saw this one woman just scowling at us. And I leaned over and I said, Alvin, do you see the look that woman's giving us? And obviously, when the DA reads an indictment to a potential jury, it's a very unsettling thing because suddenly the pleasant, smiling faces go away. And those potential jurors are horrified that they're going to be involved in a case where a man is accused of keeping his wife in the basement for 3 decades before killing her. And so the coldness immediately sets in. But this woman's scowling was from the get-go. And so I leaned over to Alvin and I said, did you ever do a bad deal with her? Or didn't give her a good TV or refused to fix it or anything? And Alvin leaned in and said, no, maybe she don't like you. Well, my ego, even though I had been crushed in a congressional race, I didn't think they had a good reason for defeating me in a congressional race. So my ego would not allow it, and I went a little crazy at the bench when the lady said she could not be fair in the trial, and we had her at the bench. The DA generally tries to rehabilitate the person to be fair, and the judge very often does the same thing. Well, she started complaining about me. Alvin was right. And I was basically saying, name one thing that I didn't do for you, because I was very proud of my constituent service. And the judge just had to calm me down and said, Poston, she doesn't have to like you. So
it's so funny. It's
so anyway, I began to realize, I could be a detriment to Alvin at this point. So interesting thing about the cockroaches is every day more were released. The judge's office was right next to that small windowless 1982 building courtroom. And at some point, the judge frustratingly said, I got to fumigate this courtroom. We're going to move the trial to the old courthouse, which was connected, but a separate building. Well, I wanted it to be in there in the first place, but he refused, but now we were heading to it. What was eerie was we are now taking the key evidence that Virginia provided for Alvin into the last place she had ever been seen in public. And I'm not a ghost watcher person. I think those shows are kind of funny where they're finding anomalies in staticky, whatever, and they're feeling cold areas of a room and think this is where the spirits are, Well, we midday changed courtrooms so that the first courtroom could be fumigated for the roaches. And this large courtroom, now it was January, but it was generally well kept warm. But I felt an eerie coldness in that room. And I also felt an eeriness that we were reuniting this evidence with the last place that Virginia Ridley had been seen in public. And I truly think, at the very least, it supercharged me. And so we proceeded with the trial. And our trial had ups and downs. And you've read about them, Patsy, and I don't want to give them all away, but there were some scary turns and mistakes that I made that could have jeopardized my client. And I felt terrible about them. But we had the rest of the trial in that grand old courtroom, which was very special.
Well, the way you write about it, it is so. I love how you are so self-deprecating. You you do tell all the things that you do wrong, and don't hide things, which is wonderful. Having dealt with lawyers many times, I'm just so happy to have you here. I realize I think we've been talking for almost an hour, and it is not a billable hour for you. So I don't know. As a lawyer, you're always thinking in terms of billable hours.
Let me tell you, this book is so important to me because it is a personal story in addition to Alvin's story, that I have taken a lot of billable hours away from my life in order to promote it. I'm 64 years old. Um, when Alvin's diagnosis with autism spectrum disorder happened, the book suddenly formed in my head because I was never comfortable just dismissing Alvin as an eccentric and not explaining Alvin. And suddenly I had an explanation for our conflict, and I had an explanation for Alvin's side of our conflict. On a 90,000 word contract, they call it the vomit draft, when you just put everything in your first draft. I wrote 177,000 words, basically 2 books, and was thrilled to get it all out of me, but disappointed when they said, "Oh no, you're going to have to cut half of this away." But my editor and my editors both said, this is a lot more personal than you kind of build it as, but we like that. So you're telling about family thing, and I think it was my effort to explain my part of the problem, my being such a micromanaging control freak that I couldn't control Alvin, much as that I couldn't control my father's drinking. And so it created the full and honest explanation of our conflict. I couldn't just say Alvin's weird and I'm always being rational and Alvin's always being irrational, because I was probably a little too hard on him. I was barking out instructions and probably giving a lot of nonverbal cues that just were just sailing right over his head because of being neurodivergent. He wasn't picking up on those. It was a processing issue. His being able to process the way I was saying things and the way I was trying to force him into submission, and I wasn't processing the fact that he is neurodivergent.
Well,
So it was a two-way street.
well, so many reasons to read this book. This telling of the story. This is really, as a legal drama, a book about. It is just, it's so great. Your
Thank
personal
you.
story is so touching, and of course you come across in the book this southern gentleman that you are. I love it. It's just wonderful. And how you approach Alvin, the mystery, as people will read this book and want to know what exactly did Virginia leave behind. This is also intriguing. It is a mystery. It is everything all rolled into one, but it is the kind of book I think people will. It is really, in many ways, it's an evergreen, because it is a book, because you are talking about adult autism, which is an important subject, and you bring such understanding as you're working with him through the years, what it meant and how the sort of the signs. And I think it will help. This book will help people across, across the spectrums, to understand what this means. And your sensitivity, you didn't know he was autistic at the time, but now when you look back on it and you see the signs, I think how you bring this out is wonderful.
Well, I'm embarrassed a great deal because there were a lot of misses. There were, the hits only happened when I would compromise. I would give in, because I realized that this is something Alvin really may not can help. Um, he does not like the feel of water on his skin, so Alvin never bathes. That makes him not always the most pleasant person to be around at the time. And as I said in the book, going through the war of a criminal trial with him, it doesn't bother me anymore. He's like a brother now.
Well, it's beautifully written. I must say to everyone, sometimes people will say it's nonfiction. So they have this idea that it's going to be very serious and telling one fact after another. But you have created this absolutely marvelous book. And
I didn't. I just told the story.
you
Every
just,
one of the characters is real, and everything they did is real.
well,
And the conversations with Alvin were easy because he still talks about that van. I've heard about that van for now 29 years almost. I mean, 28 years or 27 years, constantly about them taking his van.
uh,
And he's a lot, the 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 diagnosis of being neurodivergent has caused our community to open its heart to Alvin. And we couldn't buy a friend for him in 1998. There were a few. There was Salesman Sam. We didn't mention Salesman Sam yet. Alvin's friend that I wish had not been his friend half the time. But he had a few friends that rallied and stuck with him. But there was a huge rush to judgment against him. Well, since the diagnosis, and let's think about this. As a world, as a culture, and as a nation, we know so much more about autism now. We know so much more about adult autism now. But Patsy, there are 5.5 million adults that are not yet diagnosed. And when they have an encounter on the front end of the system with law enforcement, and they start getting orders barked to them that are often given in slang, you know, reach for the sky, stuff like that, slang that we all use on each other. A person who is neurodivergent is not going to pick up on all that language. Very literal is how they need information given to them, very literally told and expressed. And so we need better training for law enforcement who's questioning somebody who may seem disinterested in you. Same thing with judges. I I, I think terribly. I am actually representing a young autistic man at this time. His case hasn't come up yet, and it was all misunderstandings with the first responders. He had a medical emergency, and he kind of snaps back out of it, and there are suddenly a bunch of strange to him men ordering him around, and he resists, and next thing you know, it's obstruction of an officer, and that's the kind of the go-to charge when people don't cooperate. And I know judges that would have a really harsh reaction if the subject they were talking to seemed more interested in something out the window or something on the floor. The judicial reaction could be harsh. So I'm hoping, and the wonderful thing is, every small town, especially every southern small town, had a number of people that they just were the town eccentrics. With Alvin, it had gone to the extreme of almost boogeyman territory. People so feared him because just he had this menacing stare, and his accusing manners. Um, Now Alvin is softer. He's happier that people are warming up to him. And I think it's amazing. We had a book signing last night that resulted in something quite remarkable. And it's Alvin dancing. Let me see if I can get this in the right place.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Alvin dancing with a lady who insisted that he dance with her.
Oh, oh, how
And
beautiful.
and we had a signing, and oh, here's a great shot of that. And look at that
Yes, we see
smile.
it. Oh, wow.
Look at that
That's
smile on his face. There's his U.S. Army veteran cap that I got him, that he claims is a magic cap that people suddenly will buy him meals. Uh, and he loves that. Also, last night, here is a juror, Ricky Brown, that I haven't seen since the trial. And he shows up to get his book signed with Alvin, and Alvin is signing books alongside me. And here is another juror, a lady named Martha Cole, who was she worked for a bankruptcy judge in Chattanooga, and here she is.
oh, wow.
And so now we've seen 3 jurors from the case in our lines at the signings that we've had. And they are expressing almost an appreciation for that autism diagnosis because they feel so strongly that they did the right thing at the trial, and now that just reinforces it.
Well,
Alvin's very neurodivergent mannerisms, his autistic mannerisms, were actually being used against him at trial. I'm not saying anything bad about the state for doing it. It's just where we were in time and knowledge and history with the subject of autism. And his flat effect in the 911 call, his flat vocal effect, the fact that his emotions displayed that morning of October 4, 1997, did not match where they thought the moment, at that moment, where his emotions should be. And those were the things that were being argued to the jury. And those are autistic mannerisms, directly autistic mannerisms. So it's an important book in the sense of getting that word out there. But where I've been the most touched, Patsy, because the autism community is quite diverse. It is a spectrum in and of itself, the advocates for autism patients. And there's, I took a big risk, but I wrote Alvin as I found him. And I wrote about my own failures in communicating with him. But I tried to present him with the dignity that I thought he really earned for himself. His hair would look like it had just been. His hair was always nice and perfect. And here's a guy that I know is not bathing, and I'm thinking, how's his hair always so good? Well, he has a barber that he goes to regularly, and he, would always look good. He was always clean shaven. So, the man was demanding dignity, and he deserved it, and I tried to give it to him, mainly probably because of my parents. My dad did business with him. They had a kind of a bartering thing going on. My dad would sharpen Alvin's lawnmower blades on a grinder, and Alvin would come fix our TV. Matter of fact, Alvin came when I was about 13. I had worn the tuner knob off of our Zenith color TV set. We had 3 channels out of Chattanooga, and I was ripping them back and forth, my sisters and I. And it was a crescent pin on a plastic knob, so metal and plastic. So it wore. And so that knob was just spinning and not changing any channels. Well, I was just fine with the small channel lock pliers that we were using to turn our channels. But watching live wrestling on a Saturday afternoon, and my mother apparently waved Alvin Ridley on into our house. And so I am shocked that there's a man in our house, an unusual man, and he's sitting there with a TV knob in his hand watching wrestling behind me. He's not saying, "Hey, I'm the TV guy, I'm here to fix the TV." He's just standing there watching the match as well. Scared the hell out of me. The only reason I remember the exchange was after I established, "Oh, you're the TV guy," and he gives me like this 20-minute lecture on how to turn channels on a TV. But he also told me he had met Andre the Giant behind the Memorial Auditorium in Chattanooga, where he went to watch the show that the televised show was always advertising for later in the evening. So I get to tell all my friends at Ringgold Junior High that I know somebody who knows Andre the Giant. Simply, he met him, and he told Andre the Giant allegedly told him what he had for breakfast, which was outrageous: 2 dozen eggs and 2 loaves of bread or something like that. So I remembered that story. And then while representing Alvin launches into how he met Andre the Giant and how he has 2 dozen eggs. And I said, you're the guy that came by our house. And we've had this conversation before. And he goes, yeah, I've known your daddy for a long time. And, he actually went to high school with my oldest sister. So I was born their senior year. So Alvin knew me before I knew him. But that story of that connection that, I'd gone to school and told all about this guy I know that knows Andre the Giant, it resonated with him. And I think it drew us even closer.
Well, you tell the story so beautifully. The book is so great. I just want to tell people that really you have to read this book. It's just so much fun because, well, there's several reasons why you have to read this book. Something I think, first of all, let's it's really exciting for you that you are getting this kind of reviews.
Well, you've got quite impressive graphics for somebody that's new to this TV stuff, visual stuff. Those are
Well,
very, very good graphics. I want to learn from you.
well,
I,
I'm trying because one of the reasons, as I've discovered, I celebrated the 9th anniversary of my radio program. And over the years, in the beginning, before, when we say in the beginning, before pandemic, I would go to a lot of events. I would talk to a lot of people about the books that I had talked about on the radio. And I always made sure that I brought visuals because I discovered that people, they'd say, "Oh, I loved that interview. It was so good." And the author was so funny. She sounds so cute and she sounds so, interesting. What was her name? I can't remember. And I would send them to my webpage, but still, I discovered people need visuals and people need to see the names. And so that's why when I decided to do this on YouTube, that I would have the name there. Everybody's seen it over and over. McCracken Poston Jr., which is a lovely name. McCracken King. I wish I had added the King to it.
Alvin would be disappointed if I didn't show everybody his van that he's pointing to. Let's see. He's pointing to. There it is.
There it
He's
is.
pointing to. Now it has trees growing up on all sides of it. He still hasn't touched it. And but I want to invite everyone to follow and look at my social media because you can see more recent pictures of Alvin. So it's on Twitter or X, as everybody rolls their eyes when they say or X.
Or
Uh, yeah. Um, at real Zenith Man. And I say real because, again, I've had some issues with other books out there. I think I told you, if I did, that there have been 2 fake books that have been put up, and Amazon apparently let anybody in the door, and other Rakuten and other sellers, as long as you meet the minimum requirements. I've had 2 fake books that had my title and purported to tell my story. One of them even said it was a summary of McCracken Poston Jr.'s Zenith Man. They were both AI written drivel. One was from out of Nigeria, and they were offering basically my story for $5.99. Well, I know I have family members that would rather pay the $5.99 than to buy my book. So it's imperative that that's the problem with AI. We're going to be inundated with this stuff. And now I've already had 2 books. Now there is another Zenith Man that's next to mine on all the booksellers. This is our story because I put so much of it out there, and New Line Cinema briefly flirted with, they did buy a screenplay by Mark Bailey that I gave them the title Zenith Man, but then I reserved it as literary rights and reserved to use that name on my book. Well, another Zenith Man gets written, but it's fictionalized, but it's a TV repairman with a wife that nobody's seen in 30 years. So how close is that?
Yeah.
And so, I was mad at first, but I want to tell you that author got me off my butt. That and Alvin's diagnosis got me to finally write, because I had been putting it off for years and trying to figure out my way around it. And so her book is next to mine. I did get her to finally say that her book was inspired by real, true events. So, I wish her well.
I'm glad you did this because, one of the reasons, I had 9 years on the radio. One of the reasons I decided to do this YouTube channel was because of AI, because other authors are facing the same problem. And I thought, well, we need to get the authors out there, the ones who are real.
This is the real story.
This is the real story.
And it's got the real people and the real photos of the actual players, and
exactly.
None of the rest can do that.
If you send me those photos, I will add them to this document.
Oh, I will.
Because I'm going to be showing this, and when I run it, I can run your additional photos, because it's important. I want potential readers out there to know this is a real person. He is not AI. McCracken King Poston Jr. is a real Southern gentleman, and a lawyer who I think is going to, I've made a lot of lawyers rich. I have a little love-hate relationship with lawyers. I've gone through a lot of things with lawyers. And as a matter of fact, one lawyer bought a Porsche just because of me.
Wow.
But I paid him. So let me just say that I'm happy that this is not a billable hour. You can't bill me for this. But because, and in fact, I hope that I'm going to be making you much richer, because you're the one lawyer I don't mind making richer, because I believe so much in you and in this book. And I just have a little thing here I want to play. Just.
Are incredible.
Well, see, I want to encourage Hollywood. Please, Hollywood, please. I'm so tired of the things that they're running, and so much of them are not original. If one more person makes another Little Women movie, I will go crazy. Pride and Prejudice. If I see another version, I mean, that's it. I
Well,
want
let's
real
hope that
story.
they option this Zenith Man and not
That's
any of the
not,
fakes that are out there.
exactly. They better, well, it is nice, at least you're a lawyer, you can handle these things. But so many authors who are not big, but are facing already these problems.
Please don't put all lawyers in the same basket. I
No,
told
no,
you
no.
I took two goats for an aggravated assault fee one time. This is it is I've just been very persistent in complaining,
Yeah. Well, it's
and
good.
I would get on other countries' sites and find the fake Zenith Man book out of Nigeria. And by the way, it said it was a summary of my book, but when I got Rakuten to crack it open and let me read it, it was a woman that represented the Alvin character named Rebecca Mitchell. So I got transgendered by their version of it. So I told him, I said, look, it says it's a summary of my book, and it is clearly not. And so I not only got the guy ejected from Amazon and Rakuten and other booksellers, but I got Reedsy to kick him out
Well, that's,
for he used Reedsy to write the book. But as you know, an author never makes a lot of money unless they're John Grisham with huge advances and things like that. And if you get any advance, you're not going to see ever any money again until that advance is paid back by the sale of books. But this is a timeless story. This story, um, even when I'm not pushing it, it always comes back to my doorstep. A Japanese film crew from Fuji Television called and said, "We want to do the story about your case." And I said, "Do you realize that's been 20 years?" And the person said, "Yes, but it's still a story." So we were on a Japanese TV show, which was fascinating because they did a courtroom scene, and I realized some of American courtroom tradition. Ours is mainly from the British, jurisprudence tradition. But their actor playing me was arguing the case to like the whole audience of a courtroom. He was totally ignoring the jury that was behind him. So I don't know if they figured out how we do our trials yet. But they were the one interview that offered us money when I was just surprised that they would want to talk to us. And they said, "Look, we'll give you each $500." And I said, "Well, definitely bring a check for Alvin for 500." But I said, "Put my check also in Alvin's name, because when you ask him to get in his house, you're going to need it to negotiate." And I knew enough about Alvin from experience that's he's very transactional. So when they show up and hand him his check, he was very excited about it. And then they said, "Well, we'd like to go in your house." And he said, "Oh, I don't think so." And they said, "We'll give you another $500." And he said, "Okay." So that's on YouTube, that interview. And it was just the Japanese style of TV, which was so energetic, and it has like unseen narrators, watching the drama unfold, and then suddenly their voices will come out, and was very lively and fun.
well,
And so, this is just hopefully the story is timeless, as you said, evergreen, and hopefully it'll continue to be told. But for right now, I can rest and say, there it
you
is.
you've done a great job. And as a matter of fact, I love lawyers when they are great, like you are. On my radio program, I have Bill Larson, who is an intellectual property lawyer, and I call him my legal eagle. And once a month, he comes on the program to answer questions from authors about
Oh, I need to
intellectual
ask him
property.
about the fake books that I'm being
Well,
besieged by.
he's a member of Ape Law, and so he knows everything about intellectual property. And he's just great, and he's really helped some authors who have been on the program. So I love Bill Larson and I love McCracken Poston Jr. I think you're fantastic. I think what you've done is beautiful with this book. It's very exciting. You're so fascinating. You're so good. And I want to make sure that people will get this book. And when you talk about a small community where people didn't understand. I know I come from a small town, and when I was 7 years old, I started a paper route. And now, when I look back on it, one of the people on my route must have been exactly in this spectrum because she never came out. I only saw her hand. I was 7 years old, and other people didn't want to, deliver papers to her because you had to go up these creaky stairs and you had to put it right in a certain spot, exactly in the spot where she would take it. And she would
without having
put,
to come
and that's
outside.
right. And she'd put her hand out. And of course, she must have been watching me because she knew a girl was giving it, because several times there would be a little gift, something pink,
Oh,
usually, something that she had, knitted or crocheted. And so that went on for years. I never
you
saw her.
probably brought a small bit of joy into her
and
life
and all the
just
other kids
by
were in
giving.
the exactly all the other kids were afraid of her, and I know that they'd throw eggs at the house and stuff like that at Halloween. So what you're doing is also an important book, not just that it's a great mystery, a great uh, legal thriller, and a charming book. I don't know if you're going to write another book. Harper Lee only wrote one book, which became an evergreen. So this book has all the charm of that and all the charm that you have put into it and your personality.
Well, thank you. I really love the people I work with at Citadel, Michaela Hamilton and Ann Pryor and others. And I love the people at my agent, Linda Connor, my developmental editor, Bonnie Hearn Hill, out in California. I could not have done this without them because I knew nothing about the publishing industry. And so I encourage all of you. There are some quirky rules in publishing, and find people that know them and learn them.
I put up your website because, as you say on your website, you will do a book club presentations, and if it's
Absolutely.
local, you might do it, or if it's in someplace really fancy, a fancy. Hey, anybody who has a fancy book club and you're really rich, you can send McCracken Poston a, a ticket, and he'll come to you. And
Oh, listen, I'm at this point. I love telling this story so much that I told my agent. I said, if people just buy the books, I'll come to them to speak on it. Just buy the books right now. I'm cheap right now.
well, I think you would be a delightful speaker to have at an event. And so there are lots of events out there where they do pay speakers. So, but I know that you would be a delight. If I was a rich woman and I belonged to one of those, well, oh my goodness, I was a rich woman and I did belong to one of those fancy country clubs, but
But
that
that's
was
how that
years ago.
lawyer got the Porsche. So,
That's right, and that's right. And so you hit it on the head there.
you
So
know what, Patsy? We all know, especially the older I get, that story is more important than anything.
it is. It
And
really
I
is.
really appreciate what you're doing. I have subscribed to your channel now,
Well, that's sweet of you.
and I will certainly post this to all of my friends and followers. And I just really encourage folks to look at Facebook pages. Now, I don't use Junior on my regular Facebook page, but I do use JR on my book oriented Facebook page, but also Instagram, JR, Threads, which is the newest thing, and LinkedIn, even. You can find some of my graphics. I'm impressed with yours, and I've discovered Canva. Of course, I had to have a 13-year-old girl explain it to me, but but now I've really enjoyed. I've shared a lot of photos on Canva. And now I know how to manipulate them and make them more dramatic. So it's been a lot of fun.
I want to thank you so much for joining Joy on Paper Live today. And I'm Patsy with a Z, so it's real easy to remember. And there's a long story about why I Patsy with a Z. I think I'm the only one. We'll have you back when you are ready to announce streaming video deal. You're going to be back here, okay? And we can
Not
talk
going to
because
jinx it.
no, I'll tell you one thing. Everybody right now, as you know very well, everybody in the world is interested in lawyers in Georgia.
Yeah, yeah, and those are my friends who are representing uh, all these people in Atlanta and the things going on, and I would suggest that Alvin Ridley was only slightly more difficult than one of my friends' big client.
Well, I think maybe we'll have you back on and we'll just talk about Georgia and lawyers and all sorts of wonderful things because you are so fascinating. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Bye bye now.
Bye bye.
Okay. Wow. That was a great interview. I love this book and I so enjoyed talking to McCracken King Jr., Poston Jr. And wow, it's I've been having some technical difficulties and I apologize. I hope that, if you enjoyed this interview, please subscribe to our channel. I supposed to have, and I was looking forward to talking to Carolyn Howard Johnson, who is going to be contributing to Joy on Paper Live with her special insights into the world of publishing and the world of books. She's just a fantastic woman, and I am just, I don't know what's happening really right now because things are flashing that aren't supposed to be flashing. So I am going to have to stop for today, but I will do a special program tomorrow, a special program for two reasons. One, I want to make sure that I'm having this. It's flashing. I don't know why. It comes off and on. So I'm going to have to stop. And I apologize to Carolyn. And tomorrow I'll have an extra special program for her, so I can really concentrate on the advice that she wants to share with everyone. And for all of her wonderful people, I apologize. I know you were waiting to hear about her and about what she's going to be sharing with us over, as often as we can. But this other part of the screen keeps flashing, and so it's, I'm new to this. This is the fourth interview, so I apologize. Oh, it just flashed on and off again. Well, I'm gonna have to say goodbye for now, and tomorrow I think I'll be back at the same time, and I will have a special program both for Carolyn, and I'm also going to upload a video of photographs that from the Zenith Man book, and I want to make sure that you see those because they are really fascinating. Anyway, that's all I can do now. This thing keeps flashing back and forth, and it's really quite scary to me. Okay, bye bye now.